Now that we've looked at the data, our next step is actually going to be to start an SSAS project where we're going to point to these views and build a definition of an OLAP database. So what we're going to do, I'm going to follow along here with the slides. We're going to create an SSAS project in BIDS. So I'm going to open up BIDS. BIDS is what we use. BIDS, of course, stands for Business Intelligence Development Studio. It's a shell of Visual Studio that we use to create BI projects, SSIS, SSAS, and SSRS projects. So in BIDS, I'm going to click the File drop-down and select New and then Project. And I'm going to create an Analysis Services project. So I'm going to pick the Analysis Services template. I'm going to build it off the root of my C drive. And the name, I'm going to call it Mini ADW 2008, short for Mini AdventureWorks 2008. Now, I have a habit sometimes of using the same folder name over and over again. I want to make sure that I don't already have that folder. So just 1 second here, and I do not. That's good. So this will create a new folder called Mini ADW 2008. And I might want to put the word OLAP on here as well to indicate that it's going to be an OLAP project. And then I'll take OK. Now in a second I will get an empty table of contents in Solution Explorer for the project structure. So this has created a new project, Mini ADW 2008 OLAP. If I go back out, to a command window and look for that folder, well, I now have a folder out there, and it has an empty solution and an empty database. Now, obviously, these are empty files. I haven't done anything yet. Well, I'll go over to Solution Explorer, and I see the different areas that we need to fill in to build an OLAP project. Now, first of all, we're only going to fill in a few of these. All that we need to do, I say all that we need to do because it might be a lot even for a big project, but we need to create a data source, we need to build a data source view, and we need to build a cube and a dimension definition. The mining structures, the assemblies, the miscellaneous, we'll worry about another day. Now, we are going to put a role in at the end, but that'll be after we establish everything else. So I will right-click on the data sources, and I will create a new data source. I need to essentially build a connection string that's going to go back to this database. Now, I have a list of connections out here only from prior classes. I'm actually going to get rid of all these, so I'm acting as if I don't have any data connections I've ever established here on my machine. Well, I'm going to click the New button to add a connection. And I'm going to use as the server name my local instance of SQL Server, which is just localhost. Now I'm going to use the standard data provider here, which is the SQL Server native client. More often than not, the source of an OLAP database is going to be a SQL Server relational database. However, Microsoft recognizes that you might want to build an OLAP database from maybe a MySQL source, or maybe something using Microsoft Access or Oracle or some other database providers. So there are other clients, other OLADB clients and other software clients that are available that we can pick from. But we're going to pick the standard SQL Server native client. Now the database is going to be AdventureWorks DW 2008 R2. In a minute we're going to pick the views that we want, but that's the database that we want. And I'll take OK. And then I'll take Next. Now it asks something at the end here that throws some people when they're building a data connection, because normally a connection string doesn't prompt for the impersonation information. This wants to know what impersonation account should be used to connect back to the data source. Let me draw a quick picture to explain what Visual Studio is asking for here. in a nutshell, we want to be able, at the end of the day, to build an SSAS OLAP database, or an OLAP cube, as some people would say. Now, we are building it from our relational data mart. So we have our relational AdventureWorks 2008, AdventureWorks DW 2008 R2 to indicate that's a data warehouse. So that's our source. Well, there are going to be times where we might have jobs that run overnight on a weekly basis on some interval that read from the data in here and read from the view actually to populate this. And that might be a job that runs at 2 in the morning. Well, when that happens, the analysis services engine in the project actually needs to read out. It needs to read the data from the source here in order to turn around and create the OLAP cube. So SSAS needs to read from the relational source. Well, it needs to know what login account to use to access the relational data. Because remember, this could be running on a job. So it's running unattended to go read the data from the source and populate the OLAP database. So what this is asking for here is what credentials the analysis services engine should use to connect back to this data source. Now, in some environments, there might be a special domain name and account that's used. In our situation here on our VMs, and in some production situations, it's going to be whatever the analysis services login account happens to be. So we're going to use the service account. What's being referred to here, I'm trying to do this in a different color. Out here we've got the SSAS engine. The SSAS engine running on the database server. Well, it has a login account that some people refer to as the SSAS service account. And a little bit later we'll actually go take a look and see what that is. On my VM it's basically just my domain name. In a normal production environment it might be a dummy domain name. But we're going to actually use whatever is in that service account, whatever it happens to be. Now again, in my instance it happens to be sfdomain kgoff. It's going to use that to connect back to the source. So we do have to provide some basic handshaking here for analysis services engine to read back to that relational source. So I use the service account. And I'll just call this data source name the same name. Alright, so that's step one. Now the only other thing I want to talk about with this data source, even though we're not going to change it, I'm going to right click on this and go back in and open it. There's a setting here that I want to at least mention, even though we're not going to change it. When the analysis services engine reads back to the database, it's actually firing off queries. And it uses a transaction isolation level. Now most of the time, read committed, which is the default here, is going to be fine. Because it's not as if we're going to be reading from this at the same time that data is going to be updated. Not normally anyway. Most of the time it's our own processes that are going to update this, and we usually would run that at a different time than when we're going to read from it. However, in maybe unusual circumstances, maybe the source of data is something that's being hit throughout the day and we're reading from it. In that case, to avoid any contention issues, we might use the snapshot isolation level, which uses versioning and doesn't use shared locking. In a more advanced SSAS project, we'll take a look at that, but for right now, the read committed default here is going to be fine. Now that data source has dozens of tables in it. Well, we only want to use these views. So we're going to right click on the data source view area here in Solution Explorer and add a new data source view. So I'll take the next option here on the welcome screen, and I'll pick my only data source here, AdventureWorks DW 2008 R2, the same one I built a moment ago. I'll take next. Now it lists all of the tables that are in that database. Now first of all, I'll stretch out this window so we can see more of it. And I'll come down to the views, everything that began with the letter VW. So essentially I'm going to bring in my two fact table views, fact internet sales and fact reseller sales. And I'm going to bring in VWDIM customer, VWDIM date, VWDIM geography, VWDIM product, VWDIM promotion, and VWDIM reseller. And I just want to make a quick check here to make sure I didn't leave any views behind. So this is the data that I want to bring forward. These are the views that I want to use as the basis for the OLAP cube. So I'm telling, coming back to my picture here, I'm telling the SSAS project that the source is going to be those X number of views that represent fact and dimension data. This is actually a fairly common approach that people use when creating OLAP databases, because we only want to bring forward the information that we need, and so that's where views come into play. So back in the project, I'm going to bring in these views, and that's it. So I will take next, and I'll call the data source view the same name, AdventureWorks DW2008R2, and then I'll take finish. Now what happens here is that we get a basic table diagram, not a fantastic one, but we've got the different views that we're going to use. Now, first thing I'm going to do here is I'm going to structure this in the way we typically see a fact dimension diagram, and also zoom this so it'll be a little bit easier to read. So I'm going to put the dimensions so that they surround the fact tables here. So I'm going to move things around a little bit. I'm going to put VW fact internet sales and VW fact reseller sales in the middle. Stretch these out so I can see the column names. Now while it's not required where I need to put any one dimension, I'm going to put DIM customer underneath fact internet sales. And I'm going to take DIM reseller and put it underneath fact reseller sales. And I'll put the promotion up here, I'll put the product up here, and put the date up here as well. And I think I'm missing the geography dimension. Let me get that down at the bottom. And I'm going to take a little bit of time and move this around a little bit more. So there we go. So I've got in the middle, more or less in the middle, the two fact tables. Up at the top, I've got the three dimensions that are common to both fact tables. VW fact reseller sales and VW fact internet sales. At the bottom, I've got DIM reseller, which is associated with resellers, DIM customer, which is associated with customer internet sales, and then I've got the geography dimension, which is common to both of those dimensions. Now I'm going to do one other thing here. Because the date dimension is going to be linked to the two fact tables in several ways, I'm going to move these over. So that's as far as I'll take this here. Now what we need to do, and I'll do this we'll start this in the next video, we need to drag the relationships. We need to drag the primary key in the corresponding foreign key in these tables, in these views. Remember that the original raw data back in SQL Server had primary key, forward key relationships to the tables. We don't have them here in the views. Now it does recognize that things like customer key, reseller key, geography key, product key, and so forth were primary keys in the tables on which the views were based. But we don't have any relationships here. And while it's not absolutely required to do it, in our first step here, in our first SSAS project, we're going to do it. So that's going to be the next step, is to draw out the other relationships. So that'll be in the next video.